Adjusting. All right. We are live. Good morning. So let me get, let's see here. I need to tip my screen a little bit. There, that's slightly better. Okay. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining Heather and I here at the Monmouth studios here on Ask the Agronomist this morning. So I brought dead corn leaves with me. Heather wanted to know what horrible disease that was, and turns out it's just a fertility deficiency. So nothing exciting for the fungicide lady here this morning. But we got a long list of stuff here that we can cover, and as always, hopefully we get some of your questions as well. So it's another very humid morning in Western Illinois. Yesterday morning was delightfully cool. We haven't had a morning that cool for a while, and doesn't sound like we will again for a while. Next week there's some cooler temperatures in the forecast, and Heather and I were just chatting before we went live about the spotty rainfall. So I was going to talk about dry pockets, and what I've found so far in the research I've done since yesterday to get prepared for this conversation is most people are exaggerating their dryness when you look at their rainfall data. I caught Heather doing that as well. But in fairness to people that are in dry pockets, most of their June moisture was in the first half of June. And the first half of June is, a month ago now, almost. And so in the last 3 to 4 weeks, we've had some areas that have gotten really dry. Heather's in the Kickapoo area. I didn't realize that was a dry spot because all around there, we've actually had plentiful moisture. We've got a pocket that's emerged in Logan and Tazewell County, and you folks know who you are. I was going to pull up a picture here that I got. So we had a meeting here in Monmouth on Tuesday, right, Heather?
Yep, Tuesday.
So we were here Tuesday, and I didn't hear any weather when we were here at the farm, but when people left and headed east from Monmouth, they were driving in rain around Galesburg. They were driving in rain on their way to Peoria. That night, Bloomington had 4 inches in places. Washington, just outside of Peoria, had 2 inches. And I grabbed this picture off of my weather app, and that's you can see there in that dry island there. Some of you live there. You see Minear kind of there in the middle of the dry island. Within almost a stone's throw of Minear, people were getting 2-3 inches of rain, but Minear was basically nothing. And that hole there has existed through several rain events. And, so there's dry pockets all over the state. On balance, we've had really good moisture and even the dry areas. So Heather actually won the contest. The field that she pulled up in her climate account nearest her house had 3 inches in June and has only had a 10th in July. And, when you consider the fact that most of that 3 inches in June was from the first half of June, and they've had next to nothing in July, I did, she said, well, basically nothing. I said, well, give me the number, because I had a guy the other day, he'd had half an inch in 3 different rains. And so he didn't want to count the half an inch because it came in 3 different rains. You can count those 1/10 rains. They do, yes, it's not like a soaking rain, but it's better than nothing. So I made Heather count the 10th that she had in July, but that's the driest spot I've found. So if you're aware of a drier spot than that, and to compare to that, so Derek Strubing sent me some data from a farm near Hartsburg that had 4.5 inches in June and has had an inch in July. Farm from Augusta over in Hancock County had 5.5 in June and 0.4 in July. Another dry spot, I've got a field in my climate account in the Burton View area, west of Lincoln. They also tied Heather for the dry June with only 3 months, but they've had 0.3 in July. So they're 0.2 ahead of you. Here at the research farm in Monmouth, we had 4 inches in June and 0.4 in July. One of my farms at home, 4.8 in June, an inch in July. A farm of mine in McDonough County, 4.1 in June, 0.8 in July. And one of my brother-in-law's farms west of Roseville, 4.6 in June, 0.6 in July. So you see there's a pretty strong pattern there. We had from slightly below normal to slightly above normal June rainfall totals. And then July has been pretty dry for everyone. I mean, the biggest number I had there was an inch. Now, I just mentioned that, Bloomington got, 4 inches, not much corn grown in Bloomington. So that's not really helping anybody. Street flood, that's the way it goes in the summertime. Street flooding in town and nothing in the cornfields. So extremely, extremely spotty rains. And Derek Strubing mentioned to me that he thought this was some of the spottiest rains he could remember in recent years in his area. So we've got emerging dry areas. We're in a bit of a trend here where we're getting dry going in July. So if you're going to be dry, and appreciate the questions coming in, guys. I see you there. We'll get to you as soon as I quit preaching about the weather. When we we've gone through some dry Junes here in recent years and raised some phenomenal good crops. And a dry June is, neutral to positive. A dry July is never a good thing. So and especially if you follow if your late June is dry and your July is dry, that's really adding insult to injury. So a lot of people are asking me what I think of this crop, and do I think we've got the potential for the best crop we've ever had? And I think we do. But I don't think we're going to have the best crop we've ever had because, there's something's going to go wrong. Either disease, too dry in July, too dry in August. Something's going to pull the top back off of this. But it's the potential is definitely there. I'm going to show you a picture from a good friend of mine. This was those were both on one stalk of corn. The primary ear is 20 by 20 around, 35 plus long, and the second ear is 18 around, 35 plus long. Now, that stalk is not going to raise those ears, So the fact that in theory, Joe's setting on a 700 bushel corn crop right now, that's not going to happen. But he could do 3 plus. Really easily if things go well, but it's not even pollinated yet. So those are potential ears. Those aren't really ears yet. So we got a long way to go to get this crop in the bin, but it does look good. We've gotten off to a marvelous start. We do have, however good our crop ends up being right now today, we got the best crop in the country. There's places that have been wetter. There's places that have been drier. There's places that couldn't get their crop in. There's places that had a lot of replant. There's places that had a lot of ponds. There's places that are too dry. We're kind of none of that, right here, right now. So certainly optimistic about the crop, but what's the saying about not counting your chickens before they hatch? So a couple good questions coming in here today. We got one. Grant asked a question about soybean fungicide, and that was on my list. So it was near the bottom of my list. When to spray beans. So what's making it so hard to figure out when to spray beans? Well, it's early planted beans. So one of the benefits of the primary benefit of early planted beans is they spend more days of their life in reproductive growth stages. And so you get a lot more days in R2, you get a lot more days in R3, you get more days in R4. You get more calendar days in those important growth stages, and that's really where the extra yield is coming from. So early planted beans stay in the R3-ish growth stage seemingly for weeks. The window for application in soybeans, I say, is late R2 to early R4. And if you plant beans, mid-May, that's probably a 2-week window. If you plant beans in mid-April, that's probably a 4-week window. And I don't personally have an opinion as to whether you're better off to be early in that window or late. Well, I'll take that back. I lied to you. I do have an opinion. I think on normal planted beans that do more of their vegetative growth after they start to flower, I think you're okay to be in the early side of that window. But with early planted beans, I mean, if you're willing to spray April 10th planted beans at R2.5, that plant's not even half grown yet when that plant would stage at that growth stage. And those early planted beans are going to have about 20 main stem nodes. I don't want to spray beans when you've only got 10 main stem nodes or 12 or 14 main stem nodes, because that means that half to a third of your bean plant doesn't exist yet when you spray fungicide. Now, if you're willing to do 2 shots, which most of you probably aren't, but if you're playing around trying to raise 100 bushel soybeans and you just, and you want to go for it, I think it's perfectly fine to spray at R2.5-ish and then do it again at R4.5-ish. But if you're going to go one time, I would drag my feet a little bit, because there are soybeans, April planted soybeans, that based on growth staging, you would say, hey, these are basically R3. I think I'm going to go. I think we need to get the corn sprayed first. So there was 14 to 15 main stem nodes today. So that's about 3/4 of your main stem nodes. Hopefully you get to 21, 22, should have at least 20. So I would say that's plenty early to be spraying that bean, because there's a lot of leaf tissue that will be unprotected because it's not even there yet. Fungicides, as we've talked before, some of them are kind of locally systemic, meaning they can move through the leaf, but they're not going to move up in the plant, and they're not going to move down in the plant. So I would say be patient. Now, if you're going after white mold, you should have already sprayed. If you want to suppress white mold, you got to go early and then go again at like R3 or R4. So our late R1, early R2 is probably the best time to go after white mold. So if white mold is your target of your fungicide application, you probably should have made that already. If you haven't, get out there as quick as you can, get that on, and then plan on treating them again later, because you can't do what the R3 does and control white mold, because that's too long of a spread of time. So if you want to go after white mold, you either need to be in a 2-pass program, or you just focus on white mold and you don't worry about the rest of it, which that might be okay too. But you can't spray for white mold and get the same benefits that you get from your traditional R3 application. So another question. So from Tom, fortunate Tuesday, get pop-up shower. Unfortunate is with an hour completing. Okay. Yeah. So Tom's question is, we made an aerial application of fungicide. I got a rain an hour later. How much did I lose? That's a Randy Myers question. We need to phone a friend on that, Tom, and I'll follow up with you. It's not good. I'll say that. I don't know. I don't know if you're going to get half the benefit, 2/3 of the benefit, 40% of the benefit. I don't know what the number is, but I'm pretty confident it's something less than 100%. The longer that fungicide is on that leaf, the longer that leaf can absorb fungicide. It kind of depends on how long it stays wet. Sometimes with our adjuvants, kind of help keep the leaf wet. As soon as the fungicide has dried on the leaf, not a lot of absorption is going to occur unless, possibly when it re-wets with a dew the next day, maybe we could get some more absorption. So I'll do some work on that, and maybe we'll touch on that maybe on our next broadcast. And Tom, I'll reach out to you directly with the answer to that question, because to be honest with you, I don't know, and I don't, to my knowledge, I don't think any fungicide has a respray policy that I'm aware of where you could get some free product to go out and do that again. But my recommendation on that field would be to let's watch that one, watch those close, and maybe be more ready to pull the trigger on a second app in those fields, just in case the first app was not at full potency because of the rainoff event. I know I got some fields of beans that are never going to be clean because of a rainoff event on some weeds, and we resprayed it and tried to get them, but they were messed up from the first time and big and mad, and so we're just kind of live with the mess there. So herbicides and fungicides, kind of both somewhat do the same thing. You gotta get them into the plant, and if you don't give them time to get into the plant, you're not going to get the full benefit of that application, unfortunately. So glad you got the shower. Let's hope you benefit more from the shower than you do from messing up the fungicide application. But I was doing some trial work with a drone, making some applications in corn a few weeks ago, and we were fighting showers, and a little pop-up shower came up, so we had one treatment applied, and we stopped and waited till the shower passed through, and then we started going again, and then another pop-up shower came through, and I'm not sure there's anything in that little, and it was not it was less than a tenth, so I'm going to say maybe it was an ignorable amount of rain. So 2 or 3 tenths probably wouldn't have, there's guys putting fungicide on with an irrigation system that's putting on, a quarter inch with the fungicide application and feel they're getting, good efficacy out of that. So if it was 2 or 3 tenths, maybe not a big deal. If you got, half an inch or more, I would say there's probably some negative impact to that rain event as far as the efficacy of the fungicide goes. So we kind of touched on yield potential a little bit. That was that was one of the things on my list, and obviously weather's going to play a huge role in that. Protecting that crop, keeping it healthy. I'll be honest, I don't know what Heather has seen in her travels. She goes further north than me. It's been easier to find tar spot in northern Illinois all year, and it still is. I've been a little surprised that right here locally, we can find it, but you still got to look for it. And it has not, I would say, gotten visually tremendously worse in the last 2 to 3 weeks, which is good. I would have expected it to be worse at this time based on how early we were finding it and how perfect the weather conditions have been. It has been a little on the warm side, so maybe that's slowing it down a little bit. I don't know exactly what northern. I should have got a hold of Jim and Rachel to see what northern Illinois has been seeing, because they were seeing it earlier, seeing it in smaller corn. As I go south, it's harder to find, so it feels like a little more of a typical tar spot year where it's worse to the north and then tapers off as you go south. But as we've observed in past years, June weather patterns make a big difference. Like last year, the first place that it got bad, really the only place it got bad last year in central Illinois, was in the Jacksonville area. And that's because they caught about 3 inches of rain in June when the rest of us had an inch. And, that little pocket there that caught a significant rain event in June is where tar spot had the environment that it likes to have. And I kind of think we've given it the perfect environment across a pretty large swath of the Corn Belt, but I honestly thought it would be worse by now than it is. So that's good. I'm not disappointed in saying that. I'm just surprised. And I've told several people, if this doesn't end up being, one of the worst tar spot years we've had, I'll be surprised because it was here early. We've got an amazing looking crop, which is what it loves. It does better on big, healthy green corn than it does on, stunted small corn. So I'll be puzzled a little bit if it doesn't end up being, a 2021 kind of tar spot year. Now, the other thing we got to remember, and I always remind people of this, 2021 was not just tar spot. 2021 was a lot of crown rot, a lot of southern rust, and a lot of tar spot. And the trifecta of those three diseases working together to take down that plant is the reason we had some of the disasters that we did in 2021. Tar spot got all the credit because it was the new kid on the block. It was the thing everybody was talking about, everybody was excited about. That was the most tar spot we'd ever seen in central Illinois, but it was not just tar spot. If you would have taken the crown rot away, and you would have taken the southern rust away, and kept the same amount of tar spot, you'd have had a lot better corn. So I have, Jim Donnelly and I we sometimes like to argue about lots of things. And one of them is which is worse, crown rot or tar spot. And, I think you can argue, I personally, I'm going to stick up for Jim in a minute. I personally have never seen tar spot by itself kill corn. Now Jim has. And that's the difference between Northern Illinois and Central Illinois. I don't think I've ever seen corn that had nothing else wrong with it, no other diseases, die from tar spot. Now I've seen tar spot push it over the edge when it already had crown rot and some other stuff going on. But by itself, I have not seen tar spot kill corn. Northern Illinois has. So it's different for those guys in Northern Illinois. And so it's kind of normal, Northern Illinois, they're not as disadvantaged as Southern Illinois because they've got really good soil, but they got more rootworm than they know what to do with. They got more white mold than they know what to do with, and they got more tar spot than they know what to do with. So, I would almost trade away my good soil if I could get rid of those three pest problems and just try to make a living farming timber soil and not have rootworm, not have tar spot, and not have white mold, because those are three really, really baddies to have to deal with. And Northern Illinois, has more than their share of all of those. So speaking of rootworm, I did get a picture yesterday that I think is noteworthy. So, okay, let me back up here. So I should be more prepared with my pictures, Heather.
That's okay.
Maybe I didn't get it saved like I thought I did.
We have seen some adult.
There we go. And just right on cue, my producer. So I got that picture from a guy yesterday. He was scouting fields. I was not scouting. I was looking at pictures as he was scouting, and I gave him credit for. I said, "You're going to make me sound like I've been in a lot of corn because he was in a lot of corn." So that's actually some pretty nasty adult western corn rootworm beetle feeding on that leaf. And Heather's nodding her head. I embarrassed myself yesterday when Jim Donnelly had to tell me what that was. And and he teasing me. He's like, they're also known to the larval stage cause root damage as well.
So producer Heather over here is going to, Rachel and I have been out digging roots and have found some larval out in some fields.
Yeah. So that leaf is in a field of second year corn planted to Smart Stacks, not Smart Stacks Pro, not VT4 Pro. So this is planted to, a good rootworm product, but not the best. Producer noticed that, hey, I'm seeing lots of beetles in this field, seeing enough beetles in that field that they're doing that much leaf damage. And they had a windstorm a couple, 3 weeks ago, and that field lodged. But there's a lot of fields that lodge in windstorms. And so he didn't jump to the conclusion that, hey, I got a rootworm problem here. But I said, it might be worth, popping some roots out, soak them, and see what you find. And Jim Donnelly would say that that's a really, really nice root system for Northern Illinois.
That is nice.
But there's a ton of feeding in that root system. All those brown roots, those are feeding scars. A lot of the bushy, branchy parts up. I'm going to try to come in here, up in here. So you would have to kind of, to do a good job rating roots, you got to prune those roots out of there, and you got to get stuff out of your way so you can see stuff. There's been a lot of root regeneration in this, which is kind of where some of the bushiness and branchiness is coming from. That's not a bad root system. That's enough of a root system to raise a crop of corn. That's enough to keep the plant standing up. But no doubt, there's pretty good rootworm pressure in that field based on the level of root pruning that we see there. And as I reminded the producer, every one of those beetles was once a larvae. And those larvae have been feeding on your roots, and that's how they grew to adulthood. So now they're flying around eating on your leaves. So rootworm pressure, and Jim's had, Northern Illinois had their normal amount of god awful rootworm pressure. That's not a field of continuous corn. That's just plain old second year corn. So I think a lot of people have the attitude that, if I'm not raising fourth or fifth year corn, I don't need to worry that much about rootworm. And I don't think that's true. I still have not documented an issue on first year corn in my part of the world. Now, Jim has. There's so many rootworm in Northern Illinois, they don't even know where they're at. They're just everywhere. When the population, just like we used to deal with around here 10 to 15 years ago, when the population is super high, they just kind of seem to end up all over the place. But right now, today, and for the past many, many years, rotation has been very effective at protecting you from corn rootworm damage in central Illinois. It helps in northern Illinois, helps a lot, but you can't necessarily guarantee that you won't still have some rootworm issues on first year corn in northern Illinois. I'm pretty comfortable in my part of the world, maybe on like an edge or something where some beetles, maybe flew in from the neighboring field and laid some eggs on the edge. The other thing that was interesting about this particular field we were just talking about, a lot of westerns. We've seen primarily northerns the last few years, and the northern counts have been really high. Been a lot of northerns. Not seeing as many westerns. This was a pretty high population of westerns. Westerns are the baddie because they're the ones that will lay eggs in soybean fields, and they eat a lot more than northerns do. So I don't know what the ratio is, but one western probably does about as much damage as 2 or 3 northerns from what I have seen. So when you're seeing high populations of westerns, that's a little more concerning to me. Northerns are the green ones, westerns are the black and yellow striped ones and spotted ones that kind of look a lot like a bean leaf beetle. And if you're not, unless you're if you're a bad entomologist like I am, you might get those confused every now and then. So I see Jeff had another question there. Any thoughts on tar spot worse with lower plant micronutrient levels? I would say it might work exactly the opposite of what you would think, Jeff. There's actually some research that Rachel Willis has talked about where high rates of fertility have actually been documented to make tar spot worse, just because it loves a lush canopy and it thrives in a lush canopy. I've seen in 2021, I've maybe told this story before. I was in a field that was kind of a disaster. Field had been sprayed with a fungicide, but it wasn't sprayed with a great fungicide. It wasn't one of Heather's. and probably the timing wasn't quite right. It was a bad tar spot situation, and he was trying to make a decision: do I spray it again? And it was in the dent stage. It was, I thought it was too late to do any good. They did end up respraying it, and based on some check strips they left, they did quite a bit of good by retreating it. Surprised me, but anyway, in this field there was a ponded area where the corn was significantly stunted because it had almost drowned out. It was about shoulder high. It was yellow. It was going to make about 75 bushel. It was crappy corn, and it was strikingly healthy. There was no tar spot on that corn whatsoever. And I think it was, it's not that crappy corn is immune to tar spot, but it doesn't create the environment that tar spot thrives in as much as big, green, healthy, lush, dark corn. And so I'm not aware of any direct correlation between any particular micronutrient and tar spot infection. There are lots of things that if you can keep your sugar level high enough in your plant, and there are people that do testing for sugars, and there are people that talk a lot about sugars. If you can get the sugar level high enough in a plant, it's resistant to almost everything. So if feeding that plant better is causing there to be higher sugar content levels in the leaves, absolutely there could possibly be benefits to plant health. I think the benefits to plant health from fertility are more related to the fact that the plant doesn't need to cannibalize itself because it's photosynthesizing better, it's producing more sugar. The more sugar you can pack into that plant, typically the healthier it's going to be. That's why if you've ever noticed a corn plant that the deer strip the ear off of, you ever seen how healthy those are at harvest time? They're still green. They look like they'll be green till it freezes. That's because they're saturated with sugar because they had no grain to put the sugar into. That plant Joe sent me the picture of that's got the 700 kernels on it. No, 1,400 kernels on it. He's got two 700 kernel ears on potential ears on that plant. That plant's going to be reallocating some sugar at some point later this growing season as it's trying to fill that primary ear and whatever piece of that second ear that it tries to hold on to. That plant's going to be working its tail off, and there's no way it's going to make enough sugar to feed those ears, and so it's going to be robbing sugar from the plant to do its best to feed those ears. So other than other insects we've ran into, so quite a bit of Jap beetle pressure this year. So feeding, you've all seen this before, but I snapped a couple pictures yesterday of some Japanese beetle feeding. So there's a couple of them hanging out on a corn leaf there, right there, and then I think I got a close up here of. I thought I did. There. So that's probably a little bit of Japanese beetle and a little bit of corn rootworm beetle there on that leaf tip, but I more often see the Japanese beetle feeding up on the tips, up on top. They're actually waiting for some pollen in that field. It wasn't tasseled yet. Another thing you run into, lots of smut this year. Again, so we had a lot of smut last year, which is a little bit surprising because of how dry it was in June. This year, with the June moisture and humidity we've had, it feels like a rainforest out there a lot more. And Heather even commented, even in her little mini drought that she's in, there's still plenty of humidity. So we don't often get to say, but yeah, it's a dry heat here in Illinois. There's always there's always humidity. Yeah, tomorrow, 91 tomorrow with a heat index of like 100 and something. So it's going to be sultry, and sultry is what the fungi like. So I've had people tell me I haven't had a report of southern rust yet. I need to talk to our friend Rachel to see if she's found any southern rust yet. But people have reported northern corn leaf blight. There's a lot of gray leaf spot. Tar spot's pretty easy to find. There's a lot of smut. Your fungicide application is not going to do much for the smut, most likely. The other disease, and this one's a little funky. I sent this to Rachel. She appreciated this Physoderma leaf spot, which is kind of a little bit of an oddity, although it's getting more common. And there's actually a stalk rot phase of it, which gets a little concerning. This is pretty early on, so you can see that kind of making that almost like that barbershop pole pattern wrapping around the stalk. That's what it looks like early on in the leaf and the midrib. Ignore the smut streak over there on the side. I'm looking at the black spots in the midrib. Got a few more. There's one with a little more. You can see the conical. That you get that conical pattern to it because it infects the plant down in the whorl when the plant's small, when that leaf was wrapped up down in the whorl. And so you get that pattern. And when it gets really bad, it looks like that. And most of the leaves on that plant look like that. That plant's probably not going to be terribly productive member of society. But that's Physoderma brown spot. And that is a wet during the whorl stage of corn. And that field right there was early May planted corn. So I don't know if we're going to see as much in the April planted corn as we do the May planted corn, because it's kind of the stage of growth you're at when you need a lot of moisture when you're in the whorl stage as that plant's growing. I don't think a V5, that field did not get a V5, but I don't think a V5 would prevent it. I think you'd probably have to be spraying like a V7, V8, V9, V10-ish time frame, maybe, if you wanted to try it. And we don't really recommend trying to prevent Physoderma with a fungicide application. I think getting the timing right would be really tricky on that. And it's Todd just chimed in. So I would agree with you, Todd. And Todd, you've got a lot of later planted corn too. So I'm wondering if we'll see more Physoderma in the later planted corn, perhaps, than we do the early corn. Don't know. Time will tell. As long as we don't get the stalk rot phase of it, which if you got plants that are that loaded with it, and what the stalk rot phase does, it girdles the stalk, so it does not kill the plant like crown rot does or a root rot does. But you get this black lesion around the stalk, usually at the nodes. And then if you get a bit of a windstorm, that's a really brittle spot, and you'll get what looks like green snap at about black layer or slightly before. We're more used to stalk lodging then, because the stalk is cannibalized and deteriorated and it just kind of crumples and falls over. You've all seen that. But if you're out there walking around and you're just seeing individual stalks that are just snapped off clean, just laying on, nice big healthy ear, just laying on the ground, no way it's ever getting in the combine, because it's not hooked to the base of the plant anymore. And there's a black lesion kind of girdling around that stem where it snapped off. That's the stalk rot phase of Physoderma. It's been a bigger deal in Iowa. My colleague Randy Niver, who's over in the Champaign area, Randy has been battling Physoderma, and that's something that we are watching from a hybrid standpoint. There are hybrid differences. It's a little bit of it's not really a new disease, but the stalk rot phase of it is relatively new, and it is a disease that seems to be probably getting a little worse, a little more prevalent. There's always, I don't think I've ever had a year where I couldn't find, stalks with that. That doesn't bother me. That's not hurting anything. When you get it so bad that the leaf is half brown, and it gets in the stalk late season, that's That's actually not in the stalk. If you pull that leaf sheath off, it's on the inside of the leaf sheath is where that is. It's not in the stalk. So sometimes it gets confused with anthracnose. So somebody might try to call that tar spot. People see black spots these days, and you get a little crazy. But that's physoderma is what that is. So gray leaf spot, pretty typical. Northern corn leaf blight, pretty typical. Smut. I mean, it's back to the humidity thing, back to the lushness of this jungle environment that we've been in. It's a good year to be a fungus because we've had really good growing conditions for, we've seen, we've seen a lot of fungal diseases in soybeans as well. So our soybean fungicide, our corn fungicide, I get it. The market is not enticing you to spend a lot of money on your crop. I get it, but I do think this would be a dangerous year to skimp on fungicide. And while we're on that subject, I have told you about this trial many times without ever actually sharing the data from this trial. And so I went into my climate account. This is an old study. So this is the aerial application map of the second fungicide application we made. Down here in the south end of this field, we sprayed about 90 acres with a high boy, and we sprayed a third of it at 8 ounces of Delaro, another third at 10 ounces of Delaro, and the third was of this bottom half of this field was 12 ounces of Delaro at VT R1-ish. It was probably a little later than I like. I was waiting on my guys to get there with the high boy, and much like a lot of you have experienced, your fungicide gets applied when the applicator shows up to put your fungicide on. So sometimes you can't control that. And then about 3 weeks later, we came back with a plane and sprayed this. Whoops! Ooh boy, that's hard to do. That's a left brain, right brain thing, and Lance's brain's not right for that. So anyway, you can see that now and here's the other problem you have with doing trial work. That is not where I wanted them to spray that. I wanted it straight north and south across the middle of the field. So the way that got sprayed made it really hard to get good data out of my 2-pass part. So basically what I had in this field, this was done in 2022. So this was one of those situations where you see something and the following year it makes you want to do a trial. And then the following year is not the right year to do the trial because we had very low disease pressure in 2022. That would have been a more exciting trial to do in 2021. But, what we saw in 2021 is what made me want to do the trial. Okay, so Ross chimes in, seeing lots of rootworm in western Cass County. Okay, so that's good to know. Is that probably is that an irrigated corn on corn situation, perhaps, or any long-term corn on corn in that area? And then the other question would be, are they westerns or northerns? Northerns don't bother me near as much as westerns. The other weird thing about northerns is they're oftentimes the adults will lay eggs in grassy areas. And so they can lay eggs in pastures. They can lay eggs in waterways. They can lay eggs in the road ditch. They can lay eggs anywhere in grassy areas. And then when those beetles emerge, they move into the nearest cornfield they can find. And so a lot of times you'll have a lot of northern rootworm beetles in first-year corn. But those eggs were not laid in that field when it was a soybean field the year before. They were laid somewhere outside of that field, and then they move in because when they emerge, they don't want to eat the nasty grass in the ditch where they were born. They want to feed on corn pollen. They want to feed on corn silks. They want to feed on corn leaves. And they're pretty mobile, so they can travel to a cornfield somewhere. Noting whether you're looking at, and normally we have a mix where there's always a mixture of northerns and westerns. In recent years, when we haven't had a lot of rootworm pressure, it just seems like it's mostly northerns. And you go to northern Illinois, there's both, but there's a lot of westerns up there. So anyway, I got myself distracted. So this trial. So what we had, and I'll try to see if I can draw this. So what we had was this field, and down here we sprayed about I think we sprayed like 30 acres roughly of each. So we had 8 ounces of, this was Delaro. This was before complete. This was 10 ounces of Delaro, and this was 12 ounces. And this was ground applied. And then about 3 weeks later, the plane came in, and in the wrong place, applied 8 ounces of Delaro. So what I ended up with from this trial is, and the data that I'm going to share with you is basically comparing, you know, a check from here, a check from here, a check from here, compared to this, compared to this, compared to this. So what I can show you is a yield from 8 ounces and a yield from 8 ounces plus 8 ounces. And that was 239 and 241. And this is all from climate. This is all yield monitor data. I went in and did these field region reports, you know, do a little field region report here compared to this field region report over here. So that's where the data came from. So if you want to make a mental note, that was 8 and 8. Then I had 10 and 10 plus.
Oh, shoot, I might have just turned us off. Shit.
Oh, wow. All right. Well, this is an experiment here. Okay. It says we're live.
Okay.
All right. So we had a little glitch there.
Oh, we're back on.
I'll be damned. You can resurrect an Ask the Agronomist episode. So, all right. So I guess somebody who's watching, type something in the chat, verify that we are live and you can see us here. Heather was trying to change the tilt of the screen to eliminate a glare, and she turned off the laptop. But
I can see us.
What's that?
I can see us.
Okay, so you think we're still on? All right. So no actual customers have verified yet. There we go. All right. So we'll see. We'll wait here for. There we go. Hey, Kobe. Thanks, man. All right. All right. So Kobe verifies we're still here. Okay. So you didn't miss anything. You might have thought you missed something, but all we've been doing is freaking out here since you've been gone, or since we've been gone. You never went. We were gone. Okay. So we'll go on with this. So this is my 10 ounce by itself. 253 and 10 plus 8, 259. And if you forgot, here was 8 ounces and 8 plus 8. So what we're noticing here is the difference in these numbers. And if you notice, there is a little difference in these numbers. Okay. Now, what's that? What's that they do with like music when the kind of the bum bum bum?
Yeah,
when you're
background music.
when you're going for the when the big thing's about to happen. So here is the ridiculously expensive application, you know, that I'm doing this year. Actually more than this, because I'm using 12 ounces of Delaro Complete, not Delaro. So 12 ounces, 274. 12 plus 8 is 275. So the result of this was we did not see a huge effect of the extra application. And again, this was in 2022, low disease pressure. This was a pretty healthy field of corn. It was obviously a pretty good field of corn. There wasn't really anything dramatically wrong with this field of corn, but we did still see a huge rate effect of the fungicide. And this is the primary reason, in addition to tar spot being potentially bad because of the perfect weather, that I'm really strongly encouraging people to put on the highest rate they can of whatever product they choose to use. And I hope it's one of Heather's. So just to review, so 8 ounces, 10 ounces, 12 ounces was 239, 253, 275. And then when you added the sequential 8 ounces, you went to 241, 259. Oh, I lied to you. This was 274. 274, 275. So what I like to point out to people was, here's what 12 ounces got you. Here's what 16 ounces got you. Here's what 18 ounces got you. So that big shot up front was the best ROI in the whole trial. The worst ROI in this trial was 8 followed by 8. Because you got 2 applications in that for a lot less yield. Now that's one trial, 1 year, proves nothing, but a lot of you that I talk to have observed that, like, when you and your neighbor overlap on each other on the edge of a field, or you had I know somebody who accidentally, didn't do this on purpose, they accidentally sprayed more Delara Complete last year than the label would say you're supposed to, and it was unbelievably good. So there is absolutely a rate effect with, I think, with the strobilurin fungicides, maybe with the triazoles as well. I think there's a rate effect with whether you're using a crappy one or a good one. I think there's a rate effect with all of them. If you're a generic person, you need to use a full rate every time, or don't do it. But even if you're using a premium product, which I get it, the premium products are, they call them premium for a reason. It is not cheap to do this, and I get that. But try it and see. And I really, especially with the tar spot potential that we've got, would originally or would really strongly encourage you to consider full rates. Consider, very timely applications. A lot of people are trying to convince me that, well, I'm not seeing a lot of disease. I think maybe I want to wait. I don't want to go too early. It's a lot like spraying weeds. Waiting is usually a bad idea. We need to be on the early side. We need to, the way you manage disease is you prevent it from getting started. If it gets ahead of you, you really can't fix that. And something like tar spot has a lot of potential to get ahead of you. So regardless of whether you're finding tar spot or not, I would be targeting, right after tassel for that application, and to be done, long before you're done pollinating, and done long before you've got any brown silks. And then we'll evaluate about 3 weeks after that whether we think we want to go back with another application. And the way I'm going to suggest doing that is find some fields that never got sprayed. We're sitting on a farm here at Monmouth. We don't do much fungicide work here because it's just too difficult with the way the farm's laid out. And We don't want to mess up anybody's trial work or anything. So, we're not trying to make money farming here on the research farm. So we don't do much fungicide here unless it's part of the protocol. So I can find unsprayed corn here at the research farm every year easily. And if I walk into some unsprayed corn in early August and go, holy crap, this looks awful, I'm going to consider retreating mine, even though I'm putting 12 ounces on it the first time. Now, if it's not bad, you're not going to need to do another application after you put on a full rate. But do not do the full rate thinking that, okay, if I do this, I'll never need to spray it again. Because if things are bad, we may recommend another application even on top of the full rate. I hope we don't, but that's a possibility. But I think the best way to determine whether you need to do that is go find some unsprayed corn. And if the unsprayed corn, like last year when I did this, I walk into the unsprayed corn and go, I might have wasted my money, because the unsprayed corn looked just like mine that had been sprayed. There was no disease in it. It was beautiful. It was healthy. And that's a really good indication that you don't need to waste your money on that second application. Now you saw in my data, there was a little bit of a trend where the sequential did give us a little more yield, but it probably didn't give me enough more yield to make money doing it, especially with the cost of application. So I don't take that second application lightly. I like to talk myself out of doing that. I like it when I feel good about not doing that, but I am prepared to do it under the wrong circumstances that, it looks like we need to do it. We talked about beans. So one thing we haven't talked about since I brought my dead leaves in here, we'll talk about these. So these came off the same plant. This one was a little, this one was a little further up the plant than this one. So this one, it's a little hard to say what's going on here. Just looking at the leaf, you notice that the center part of the leaf is the only place that has a little bit of green left. But right here, where the midrib actually is, it's dead. And so you're looking at that going, well, I don't know what, there is no nutrient in my book that has a leaf that looks exactly like that. But there is a nutrient in your picture book that has leaves that look exactly like that. And all of this is just a worse version of this. So this is virtually all potassium. This is coming from the field edge. You've all seen this. We talk about this every year. We do not get a full rate of fertilizer applied out to the edge of the field ever when we're broadcasting fertilizer. And over decades and decades and decades, even in a well-managed fertility field, the outside 10 feet of your field there is deficient in potassium. Simple as that. And I've taken soil tests to prove that. You go to those spots and you pull soil tests, you'll have double-digit potassium levels in that soil. It might be 350 out in the middle of the field and 80 on the edge. And if you mow your roadsides like a yard, it just gets worse, because that grass, the roots are growing out into the field and they're grabbing nutrients, and then you cut the grass off and it falls in the ditch. And so it's pulling out of the field, landing in the ditch, pulling out of the field, landing in the ditch. You never put the biomass back that you're mowing off. You never put it back in the field. So we're just mining that field edge for potassium. And that's what's doing this. It's not going to significantly impact the yield of your field. It just looks bad. So, I'm a cattle person. Heather's a livestock person. We could put all our fences back up and everybody get some cows and let that grass and the fence grow up 3 or 4 feet tall, and you can't see this. Or we can start putting high rates of fertilizer on the outside 10 feet of the field somehow. But those are the only two ways to fix this problem. You can't just spread more potash across the field and fix this, because you need a I mean, you need a really high rate. I mean, I'm talking, probably, I don't know, maybe 500 pounds a year for 5 or 6 years in a row on that outside 10 or 15 feet to fix that. So, get good job opportunity for some industrious teenager. Go get yourself a 10-foot drop seeder and some bags of potash fertilizer, and hire yourself out to drive around the outside. Well, you don't have to go all the way around the field. You just got to do the edge next to the road, because that's the only one anybody cares about. And you could actually charge for your time and services really, really well, if you could fix this for people, because people really get tired of looking at that. So anyway, I think we've got through our list. I'm awful glad you're still here. I'd have bet you could have gotten a steak dinner out of Lance, because I was pretty convinced that we could not refresh the screen, restart the thing, and we rejoin you still live. That was actually kind of cool. So
You can do it.
yeah. Don't count on doing it again, Heather. So anyway, so glad we were able to save it. You might have wished we'd have just crashed, because you were getting sick of listening to us anyway. But we made it back. Thanks for sticking with us. Appreciate all the great questions today, guys. Did we get everybody's question, Heather?
I think so, yeah.
Okay, all right. So anyway, once again, we'll be back in 2 weeks, which will be like the 24th. I'm guessing, because today's the 10th,
Yeah,
right?
the 24th.
So about the 24th of July, same time, same station, we will be back with you. And who knows what we'll be talking about then? Hopefully we're talking about great crops and low disease pressure and no rootworms, and all the weeds that you missed just magically died, and everything is great. The markets are rebounding. Who knows what kind of great news we'll be sharing in 2 weeks, but we'll be back with you, and everybody stay safe, stay cool, and we'll see you again soon.